Welcome back to the Be Free Show. This is part 2 on faith, picking up from season 1 on faith. I'm Ali. This is my good friend Denise.
Hi.
And we want to talk about 3 key things in this episode. We want to talk about God being a God of love, the vertical relationship being the second thing that we want to nurture with God, and the third thing being discussing institutions and their history. We recognize not everybody in the audience is a believer. We recognize not everybody in the audience, or different people in the audience are in different areas, different stages of their faith walk. And we honor that. We want to talk about that. We want to elevate what some of the common issues are around faith. Anise, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is we believe faith is an important concept with our original topic of free self to free society.
Yeah.
So when we think about faith, it's a foundation that will allow us to maintain hope as we push for justice in society.
Yeah.
And so the first point we want to talk about is God is a God of love. And essentially, if it ain't love, then it's not God.
Right.
So last season, we talked about some of us may have had interactions with people from various faith backgrounds that weren't positive and made us start to doubt that God was love. And we want to say first and foremost that if you're experiencing interactions with people from different faith backgrounds and it doesn't seem as if it is based in love, then that's not a good representation at that moment of what the God of love actually is.
Yeah, I think through our experiences, we have seen this go wrong. We have seen people ascribe things they've heard in institutions, whether it's a mosque or a church or a synagogue or elsewhere, that encourage division, that promote divisiveness as a reflection of religion at large, as a reflection of God at large. And it turns people away from having that relationship. We're going to dig into that later. But this notion of God being a God of love is just something that I think if people could hold on to that or have some faith in that idea, try that idea on, as we like to say, it will keep you open, it will keep your heart open to the possibility, if you're a non-believer, of the fact that there is a all-encompassing and omniscient, a controlling God, and controlling in a good way, as in making the universe work with laws that center on love.
Yeah, and I think for me, what that means is having a personal relationship with God, which is all about nurturing me into the best version of, myself. And we talk about this a lot on the show because our goal with every topic is to help you to begin to think internally, what does it mean for me to show up with the best version of myself? And for me, when I think about the God of love, what I learned through my spiritual text, it helps me to think about how do I show love to people? How do I show compassion to people? How do I show grace to people? And that really is the core essence of what I'm trying to bring in my body as a vessel to do justice work. And I wanted to point out this book called The God of Love. It's written by Mirabai Starr. And it was really helpful for me because it helped me to understand at the heart of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is this concept of the God of love. And that when you take the core foundations of each of those faiths, then you see the interconnectedness of you being a servant in this world, of you interacting with other people with loving kindness and joy and a desire to bring justice.
So I grew up in a Muslim household. My mother and father were wonderful examples of what it means to be a Muslim. They were generous, they were caring, they were compassionate, they were faithful. And yet, I grew up in an environment where religion, spirituality was not a popular thing. Many of my friends who were intellectuals happened to be the same people who kind of bucked against the system and said, religion is for people who don't think. Religion is for people who are non-analytical, who are socialized, who are passive. And in some way, shape, or form, I started to internalize some of these beliefs. Despite having that rock and presence at home, research says our peers shape us more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So I went on my own faith journey. And the number one thing that I found that was so important, Anise, during the years where I was agnostic, meaning that I didn't know what I believed in. I didn't necessarily believe in a God. I definitely didn't believe in any religion. The most important thing, and this is the thing I tell people when they're on this journey, is I had to remove all the middlemen or middlewomen, all the middle institutions. I had to remove all of that and just focus on this vertical.
Yeah.
I literally sat cross-legged for every day for a month straight and said, God, if you're there, please show me some sort of sign. I'm not expecting you to send an angel or tap me on the shoulder or anything like that. But
Right.
if you're there and you're all-knowing and you can see, you know in my heart, I'm confused. And I need some sort of sign, some sort of something. And I'm not going to say something magical happened, but the magic for me was that each day I felt more and more convicted to come back.
Wow.
You know, and then I would say the miracles started to happen in terms of me experiencing that conviction and transformation internally.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, and it was really a good example of the purpose of what I say sometimes filtering out the people,
Right.
right, and then focusing on that vertical relationship,
Yeah.
right? Because I think someone told me when I was growing up, church is for the sick. Like sick people go to
Wow.
church. And it was really a lesson for me to understand that when you go into a church sometimes, I mean, I've heard stories from people where like they tried to sit down, someone said this is somebody else's seat, or a person looked at them funny when they walked through the doors because they weren't dressed a certain way and they didn't feel any love. And so when I learned that lesson that like church is for the sick people, it really gave me a sense of empathy that, people are drawn to religious institutions, to church, is because they want to be healed. They're trying to get to be the best version of themselves.
Right.
And so in that moment when you meet someone who's treating you in a way that's not welcoming or not loving or, that's not inviting for the place of worship, to think about how can I realize that they are also on their own journey.
Exactly.
And so at that moment where I've met them, they may not be there on that journey. So it's acknowledging that, yes, I may have had a negative interaction or I may have had a bad experience, but that one experience doesn't take away from an entire faith belief or faith system. If we understand the idea of why people are drawn towards a higher power is because we want to be the best version of ourselves. We want to figure out, how do we live a whole life? How do we live a full life? How do I live a life where I am truly being the best human possible? And for me as well, that comes from nurturing that vertical relationship while at the same time having grace for these other people that I'm meeting along the way.
Yeah, that's powerful. It makes me think like it's interesting the kind of unique challenges that we face across religions. And so let's take Christianity and Islam, for example. For every 100 churches out there, you have maybe 5 or 6 mosques.
Right.
So one of the unique struggles we have as Muslims growing up in America is we just don't have a lot of mosques to attend, a lot of pastors who are preaching a word that feels relevant to our generation. I'm not saying there are none out there, but they're fewer and further in between. Whereas with Christianity, you have a lot of churches out there, and while that could be a benefit, there's also the risk that you're running into more scenarios where you have one bad experience, you go to another church, you potentially have another bad experience, and now the propaganda you've been fed about, the divisiveness, the whatever it is now being reaffirmed, and you kind of get stuck in this like, I'm not messing with that. Religion is the cause of wars, it's the cause of deaths, it's the cause of everything evil in the world, when that's not quite true. That's not true at all, actually.
Yeah, and one of the things that highlights for me too, it goes back to the first point that we made, right, which is this idea of, if we understand the foundation, is that a God is a God of love.
Right.
So if I'm having these negative interactions, something is going on, not necessarily with God, but it's going on in the interaction that I'm having with the person, and not casting out that entire faith. But that is a challenge, my friends and people I know who've been hurt by faith, it's often been they've had an interaction with someone in authority, and usually at a younger age, where they were really trying to question and have a better understanding of what their faith was about. And they either got like a quick one answer, or they didn't see love being portrayed in a person of authority within the faith.
Yes.
And it often caused them to run away and not want to engage,
Yes.
With their faith. And I think for me, I would say, I grew up with my family as believers, like we believe in God. That was never a question in our family, but it wasn't until I got older that I actually explored what it meant to have a vertical relationship with God. What does it mean to have, this personal interaction? Whereas I would say before, I was just following a religion,
right,
essentially.
Right.
Now I can say I'm actually a follower of Christ. I'm actually practicing a one-to-one relationship about what does that actually mean to be a Christian.
Right. Now, maybe you're out there and you're saying, well, you all have as a presumption, as an assumption, that we should just take wholesale this idea that God is a perfect God of love, that He's all loving, that everything He's doing, is working in our greater good. Maybe that's not an assumption I necessarily carry. Maybe I'm not convinced of that. And I think for us, that's part of what the vertical looks like. It's also the importance of self-education.
Yes.
So a lot of times when people were feeding me things about Islam, well, if this was really a good religion, how are you allowed to marry 5 wives and beat your wives and all of these things that are frankly untrue, right? But how was I supposed to know that? I felt in my heart that stuff was probably being taken out of context or exaggerated or whatever. But it wasn't until I actually started reading, I actually started studying, that I realized, oh wow, these are just fallacies that are actually gaining mainstream traction. This is extremely dangerous. This is toxic. So that self-education piece is so critical to this. And when you're hearing us talk about the vertical, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, for me, it looked like me saying to God, I'm confused. Here are the things that I'm hearing. Show me a sign. Give me an answer about this. Here's one particular thing I'm confused about. Why is there corruption on earth if you are a loving God? And for me, in my experience, God will point me to resources. And the next day or a week after, or at the right time, whatever that is, I will end up with a book or run into a person who is going to minister to me on that exact point, on that exact question. Or I'm just going to have the insight, the kind of nugget's going to drop into my mind of like, go seek out that answer and here's how to do it.
I think you raised a really good point about the self-education piece, right? And, we said in season 1 that we all believe in something, right? We have faith in something. People say, oh, I have faith it's going to happen. Or, whenever our lives seem to take a negative turn, we all become believers in some way, shape, or form. We're putting our faith in something. But this idea of self-educating and learning, I think, is really key, and something that, I've seen as a part of our friendship, your own journey in digging more into your faith. Do you want to talk about, where you are right now with this idea of going public and really trying to bring truth to the world about what Islam is and breaking down some of those stereotypes?
Yeah, thanks for that. First of all, it's not anything I ever imagined myself doing, truly. I found myself in a place where I realized, wow, this propaganda, this internalized oppression I had around my religion is something that not only I've had to deal and struggle with, but hundreds of thousands of youth all across this country and across the globe are facing and struggling with. And where is the space, where is the opportunity for us to really, talk about that in the social media sphere, in the media world? That's an important distinction, because people out there are like, well, my mosque, we have these discussions all the time, and that's awesome, and please continue to do that. But I felt like we needed a place in the media where, even if you're not a scholar of Quran, I could use my tools as a scholar in general, and my love for the Quran, a book that I have been studying carefully for some years now, and merge those two worlds to say, here's how I'm interpreting it based on teachings that I've read, based on my greater understanding of this of God and the context of this Quran, and share that with the world in 1-minute bite sizes, that people can digest, and open up the opportunity for dialogue and engagement.
Yeah, so it's called Inside the Quran IQ, which I think it's a great play on words with this idea of, I think of it as raising your spiritual, your religious intelligence.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's what your goal was for, but
that was.
That's what I took it from the IQ. But I think something else that, calls out to me with you doing that is this idea of reclaiming your faith.
Yes.
Right? I think we have to reclaim institutions that have been perverted by people who, in their mind, were well-meaning and well-doing, but it actually was not a true living out of what God really intended for those particular faiths.
Right.
And so we would be remiss not to own the fact that Christianity, Judaism, Islam, a number of our faiths have created some atrocities, right? Have used faith as a way to enslave people, have used faith as a way to put people in domestic labor, to kill people. It's been used to, in a perverted sense. And so I think as a part of being a believer, and for me as being a Christian, that I have to own that's a part of the history of my faith.
Yes.
But that doesn't define my faith.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm encouraging people out there to do is that, we can still hold, yes, there were people who perpetrated parts of the faith that were not just, that were not according to the text, that was their own human interpretation of the text that created hurt, with at the same time being able to hold the fact that when you open any of these books, it's a beautiful understanding of what it means to develop an intimate relationship with God, to live your best life on earth. And at the core of all of them is this idea of loving humanity, of justice, of creating a space where we can live with one another, in sisterhood and brotherhood, which is something that we direly need right now.
Right. And I have to say, Anise, what you're asking people to do is very difficult. It was very difficult for me to do. And I owe a lot of credit to you for really helping me to do that, because I was so sick and tired and hurt and disgusted by the ways in which Islam is portrayed in mainstream society, that whenever somebody would associate something perverted like that with Islam, I would instantly be like, well, that's not Islam. I would feel defensive, I would feel hurt, I would feel enraged, like many Muslims do, by the fact that it's being used in this sense. And the distinction you're making is, it's not that you say that is Islam, but it's that you say, yes, people are doing it in the name of Islam, and that's wrong, right? And here's the evidence to suggest that this is absolutely not true.
Exactly.
But we do have to own the fact that people have been scarred by these institutions. It's an important distinction, and it's hard to hold those two things, but it does help us start to open dialogue, right? And it helps broaden people's perspective that, like, just because I'm Muslim doesn't mean that I'm anti-gay people. Just because I'm Muslim, it doesn't mean that I'm misogynistic.
Right.
Right? And so that's tough for people.
It is, and thank you for owning it again, and owning that it is tough, and speaking to folks' hearts and minds, because that's what people are probably thinking as they are looking at this episode.
Right.
And we realized that we were taking a risk by making our faith public with the Be Free show. We realized that we were taking a risk by saying we believe having a foundational belief, a foundational spiritual belief through a faith is key to being in the justice movement for the long term. But I'm very proud that we actually put a stake in the ground on that, because that's what we believe to be true, and we've seen the beauty in which it's helped in our lives, in our journey to advance justice, and just want to encourage other people to give it a shot, to see if it's something that you're willing to open your mind to say, if I want to be in it for the long term, for fighting for justice. It's a marathon. We all know it's a marathon and not a sprint. For every step we take, for every 12 steps we take forward, we may take 10 back, or 10 may be taken from us. But how do we keep hope alive? How do we keep faith that we need to keep moving forward and not be deterred by those small mishaps?
Absolutely. Beautifully said. I don't even need to add to that. Other than to say you can find us anywhere online at Be Free Show. We hope, we mean this for all of our topics, but we really hope this is one where you'll just open up your heart to us and let us know what you're thinking, what your questions are, where you might disagree with us. We truly invite that constructive criticism, that questioning. It's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So until we see you next time, we love you
and be free.